From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. As President Joe Biden's term in office comes to a close, some of his administration's key appointees are reflecting on his eventful 4 years in office. And one of those people is Robin Carnahan. The Rolla, Missouri native has been the administrator of the General Services Administration since 2021. And that critical agency is in charge of managing federal buildings and procurement policies for the federal government. Carnahan is no stranger to public service. She served as Missouri Secretary of State from 2005 through 2013, and her family has been involved in Missouri and federal politics for decades. She's the daughter of former Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan and former U.S. Senator Gene Carnahan. Her brother Russ Carnahan served in Congress and the Missouri House, and her grandfather, A.S.J. Carnahan, was a Missouri congressman and ambassador to Sierra Leone. Carnahan joins us from Washington, D.C. to discuss her time as administrator and the future of the General Services Administration. Robin, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, Jason, it's great to be with you.
As I mentioned, you are definitely not a stranger to leading executive agencies, particularly in Missouri. Your family has also been in charge of major enterprises, especially on a state level. But what was it like to take the helm of such a massive governmental entity like the GSA, which often doesn't get a huge amount of attention, but plays such a major role in federal government functioning?
Yeah, it's a great question because it is quite different leading a federal agency than it is at the state level. But it's worth remembering that Harry Truman is the one who established GSA 75 years ago. We just last year had our anniversary. And he did that because the federal government, the executive branch, had never really been organized or thought through intentionally. It just sort of grew over time. And so he had something called the Hoover Commission that former President Herbert Hoover led to think about how do you actually structure the executive branch of the federal government that had grown a lot after World War II and during World War II to be more effective. And so Truman's vision was that we ought to have an agency that was sort of like the back office, operations arm of the government to make government work better and save money. And so that's why GSA was established. And that still is the mission that we follow today. So for me, it's just been terrific to be able to do that because that's what I'm all about is like, how do we make our government work better for us, make it better, faster, cheaper, and that way we're delivering for the people we serve.
You had been a part of GSA before President Biden nominated you to lead the agency. Can you talk about what you did there and how it helped you transition into your role as administrator more seamlessly?
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be GSA administrator. Like most people, I didn't really know much about the agency at all. But if you probably remember the days of healthcare.gov, where the president's signature policy initiative kind of fell by the wayside and got in a lot of trouble because the website that people needed to go to access it didn't work and crashed. And so it got me thinking a lot about when I was Secretary of State. So much of delivery of services nowadays is really about technology, and can those technology tools serve people and do it in ways that are easy to access and secure. And a funny story, I was on a plane with someone who was the president's chief technology officer, and I said to her, look, I know you guys are thinking about this at the federal level, but the same issues affect states. And she said, you need to come help us with that. And so I said, well, I don't want to move to Washington. And she found a place, and that was GSA had a team that they had put together post-healthcare.gov to bring technologists and people who were thinking about helping make technology work better into the federal government.
It's often easy to caricature federal politics as this never-ending partisan fight where there's chronic gridlock and hostility rules the day. Did you find that your agency, which is literally in charge of making sure the federal government is functioning, was able to rise above that dynamic?
Yeah, look, there are there are things that never go out of style, and making government work better and saving money is one that crosses all kinds of lines. So in that way, here at GSA, I think, we really are an operations agency that are trying to make things work better, and that's bipartisan. So that's great. Now, that doesn't mean we don't get into, issues, because there sometimes are, but in general, we are an operations agency and everybody wants operations to work better. So that's been a blessing to me. I will say that, the general partisan fights that happen in Washington over budgets and things like that are very disruptive to our agency. They end up costing taxpayers a lot more money because of all the things we have to plan for. And also the deferral of, very basic things like how do you maintain a building and how do you dispose of buildings you don't need anymore. If you think about it in your own life, I always tell people, if you have a business that has 2 locations and you need to consolidate down into one, you need a little bit of money to get the one ready to get the other folks into, and then you sell the building you don't need anymore. Think about that on a massive scale. We've got 8,000 real estate assets around the country, and we can really optimize those and shrink that footprint, but we need to have some money to be able to do it. And so it is tiresome when people recognize that these infrastructure investments need predictable funding and they don't provide it. So for me, that's kind of the biggest frustration here, is I think we could do a lot of things better if we just had some predictability in how it was funded.
You kind of bring up another maybe nonpartisan frustration where your agency may want to shut down a governmental building that is just not serving its community very well, but there may be political pressure to keep it open just because it may be a big source of the economy of a certain place. Did you kind of run into some of those parochial disputes as GSA director, or was everybody just super happy with the way you managed the federal real estate inventory and were perfectly fine if you wanted to do what you just mentioned and sell excess governmental buildings?
Well, if only, Jason, if only. But look, you have been around politics and politicians long enough to know that their job is to protect their districts and things that happen in their districts. And having a big government building and an asset there is obviously something that people like. But here's the reality. If they're not serving the community well and aren't being actively used, then they're actually better to do something else with them. And so, yeah, that all takes a lot of conversation and negotiation and working with local communities to make sure these government facilities in the middle, often in centers of cities, are actually productive in those cities. So, in some cases, if we need to downsize, those become municipal or state assets that they use. Other times we sell them, and they can become housing or they can become other things. So it's been really interesting to see how the role that we play with this, biggest real estate portfolio in the country can really be used to help communities if you're smart about it.
The last time we talked in 2022, we were discussing how GSA was involved in following through on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's now 2025. Where do you think the federal government is on following through on that measure?
Yeah, so the infrastructure, there were 2 really big pieces of legislation that affected us a lot at GSA. One was the infrastructure bill that you mentioned, and the other was the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And between those 2, we ended up with about $7 billion in additional funding. And the infrastructure money is focused on how do we upgrade and modernize land ports of entry. So think about border crossings on the northern and southern borders. And the idea with that is it's important that those do better to support trade and commerce, that they, are enhancing the safety of the country, that there's security, that there's drug interdiction facilities, all those things, as well as local good paying jobs. So we're in the middle of a lot of those projects right now. They're in progress. And then we've also used the Inflation Reduction Act funds to not only supplement those projects and make sure that they're sustainable and green and producing good jobs, we're also investing that money all across the country in projects that make our facilities not just more sustainable, but saving money. I always talk about these investments as a triple win. They're good for American jobs and innovation. They're great for saving money for taxpayers, because particularly when you lower energy costs and use, you're saving money. And they're great for the environment in our communities. So I'm super proud of the work that we've done there all across the country.
If I'm not mistaken, though, there are elements of the infrastructure bill that still need to be rolled out when Biden leaves office. What are going to be some of the things that your successor as GSA administrator is going to need to do to make sure this legislation, which I should just note was one of the few bipartisan things that passed during Biden's term, continues to be rolled out in the most effective manner?
We know how that money is going to be spent. We have 26 projects across the country. They're identified. We're in the midst of getting RFPs and things done for those and getting bids to start construction. Some construction's already started. So I think for us at GSA, it's pretty clear where that infrastructure money is going. I think for other agencies, if you think about the Department of Transportation or others that got a lot of money that then is passed out through grants to states or to counties or to cities, that's another story. But for us, we know exactly where all that money needs to go.
We're talking with Robin Carnahan, who is the administrator of the General Services Administration. So I want to talk about the hottest topic in technology, which is AI. Seems to be on the top of everybody's mind right now. And you've talked a lot about how artificial intelligence could be implemented into the federal government. Can you talk about how it could make agencies function more efficiently and effectively?
When I think about AI, which is, it means lots of different things, but a lot of it is about data, right? How do you use these large language models and all of this data to actually provide you better insights in how you're doing your work? And as you think about data, an awful lot of foundational sources of data are government sources. Think about identity, comes from states or from passports or Social Security. You think about businesses, they're licensed by government. You think about property records. You think about weather records, health records. Lots of things are foundational source of data is government data. So question, how do we get that data that has frankly already been paid for by taxpayers, right, able to be ingested and used effectively in these large language models? And how do we make sure it is accurate? How do we make sure it's secure? How do we make sure it's used in ways that are responsible and accessible to everyone? So that's sort of the umbrella notion here, is that there's lots of ways we could use this data to deliver better for people. And so we've put out at GSA an AI procurement guide. It seems kind of wonky to think about, but all of these tools have to be bought by somebody who is a procurement officer whose job it is to buy technology tools for the government. And so what we're trying to do is lay out a lot of the trade-offs and things that people should think about as they use these tools. But it's really super exciting. And we have lots of deployment going on within GSA and across government to make things work better and to not get behind the curve on what we know is going to be just a transformational societal change.
Well, you mentioned accuracy, and I think that has been one of the big problems of things like ChatGPT. And I'm going to give you an example that is admittingly a bit on the nose, but I think kind of showcases the pitfalls here. So oftentimes when I find an AI service that is either run by Google, Facebook, Twitter, or ChatGPT, I do a test. Has there ever been a governor from Jefferson County, Missouri? And oftentimes the
I
prompt
even know
says
the answer
no.
to that.
Yeah, the answer, of course, is Jay Nixon. He's from
Yes.
DeSoto. Oftentimes it says, no, there's never been a governor from Jefferson County. And I'm like, are you sure about that? And then I kid you not, oftentimes the Chat GPT would say, oh, I'm sorry, Mel Carnahan was a governor from Jefferson County, Missouri. And I was like, no, that's not true. He's from Rolla, Missouri. Everybody
Well,
knows that.
actually, he was born in Birch Tree, so that is down in
Fair,
Shannon County.
fair point. But that can be funny for an anecdote like this. But if you're talking about a situation where you're using AI for somebody to access critical government services and it gets basic facts like that wrong, it could be really bad. So how do you kind of like avoid some of those pitfalls to where AI doesn't make really obvious mistakes like that and it kind of makes it less useful than
Right.
exciting?
Right. So again, it goes back to what you're optimizing for and what you're using it for. So in some of our instances, we use internal data, and so we know the data sources. So figuring out how you've trained your large language models is really important, and the data sources that are used for that are the foundation. So that's the key here, is knowing what you're relying on and knowing if the data is good. It's the same issue that's plagued computers since the beginning, which is, if you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. So understanding data sources and having lots of transparency about that is super important.
When you're talking about the federal government, which has an incredible amount of data, and then you're also talking about AI, which I think one of the criticisms of it is that it can be very environmentally taxing just because of the amount of energy it needs to work. That seems to also be kind of a long-term challenge if you're thinking about deploying AI in kind of a environmentally responsible way. What has kind of been the discussions around that sort of aspect of infusing artificial intelligence within the federal government?
Well, look, you bring up a really important issue, which is energy and energy security, and how do we make sure in an era where there is increasing demand for power and energy from the hyperscalers and the folks who are putting out these AI tools. There are a few things that we're doing at GSA. We're one of the biggest buyers of power in the country. And so we have used that buying power to try to work on getting net new carbon-free electricity on the grid. And so just last week, we announced a really big purchase of carbon-free electricity in a big region in Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and along the eastern seaboard that is a 10-year contract for the government to buy carbon-free electricity. And it's smart because it locks in prices for energy for 10 years for the government in an era where we don't know what demand is going to do to prices. So I think those two issues, the sort of issue of how do we deal with and stay globally competitive when it comes to artificial intelligence and these new tools. To do that, we have got to have energy security at the same time and link those two together. And so we understand that the future is going to be won by the country who figures that out, how to provide that carbon-free electricity in ways that are affordable for people, but also meet the demands of the new technology going forward.
You mentioned that you have like tried to create a procurement guide for the federal government to obtain AI services. As far as I know, most of the AI that we see, at least from a consumer level, have been deployed by for-profit companies. How do you make sure that the federal government is not being, I don't want to use the word ripped off because that's pejorative, but they're getting the best value
Right.
and they're not
Yep.
overspending for these products, basically?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. It's like, how do you have government become better buyers of these new technology tools? That's how I think of it. How do we make sure we're asking for the right thing and getting the best price? And it's not just about AI tools where we're thinking about this. There's a great example just recently of a project where Microsoft, which provides lots and lots of software to the government, was basically selling the same products to different agencies for different prices, right? And so the government sort of figured out that we need to be better buyers, and part of that is understanding what the price is that everybody's paying and make sure we're all getting the best price. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but the way government buying happens is very disjointed and diversified. And so bringing that all together is about being a smarter buyer. So that's what these guides are about, are helping the folks that are at agencies that are in charge of a bunch of this, know the right questions to ask and be able to have transparency about pricing and value.
So your term or tenure as GSA administrator will end when President-elect Trump returns to the White House. Do you have any sort of early plans on what you plan to do next besides, I don't know, taking a wonderful vacation taking a wonderful vacation and seeing all the beautiful state parks in the state of Missouri?
Well, that is a great goal and aspiration, to get out to more Missouri state parks. Look, I've had a terrific run here at GSA. It's been a great honor to serve, to be in a place where you can use the buying power of the federal government to help drive markets and grow the economy and focus on things like helping small businesses and pushing forward on the green energy economy, and thinking both about physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure and how we do those things better, faster, and cheaper. Those are issues I'm going to stay involved in going forward, but I'll do it from outside of government, and just really excited to have had this chance to make a difference. I often say that you don't often in life have a chance to have money and momentum at the same time, to work on really, really important things that have a big impact on your community and your country. And we've been able to do that here at GSA in the last 4 years. And so I feel great about that.
What advice would you have for whoever becomes the next General Services administrator?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. That is to just rely on the good people that we have here on this team. There are about 12,000 GSA employees. They are 75% of those are outside of Washington, all around the country. About 75% of our assets are outside of Washington. And these are professionals that really know what they're doing. And so there may be 30 political appointees on our team. And so just understanding that the real operations and value of the work here is done by the professionals that have made a career of serving the public at GSA, and to listen to them and help them get things unblocked and empower them to do the work they know is important for the American people.
Robin Carnahan has been the administrator of the General Services Administration since 2021. She also served 2 terms as Missouri's Secretary of State from 2005 to 2013. Thank you so much for joining us on the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Great to be with you, Jason. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Today's episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum.
Recorded and edited by Emily Woodbury.
Podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.